And again, those are things that we need to determine before any sticks or dice are thrown, because we need to know what we're measuring. One of the biggest problems I see of people learning geomancy is, and really a lot of divination is, being loose in your question. And we can be very precise in how broad we are. We can firmly delineate a huge range of options or topics, but we need to delineate, because if we don't, it can be unclear if we're looking at the problem in that area of life or the solution. That's especially the case in, say, like the sixth place, the sixth house, Valetudo, which can cover what's good for you to do to keep up with good health, but it can also measure what's wrong with you right now. What's the nature of the disease, the sickness, the malady, the dyscrasia, the bad mixture. And so we want to be very clear about what we're measuring. And I would argue we want to do that before we've cast anything.
Welcome to Coffee and Divination, a podcast about the arts of obtaining hidden knowledge in changing times. Join me, Joanna Farrar, to chat with experts from around the world on tarot, runes, geomancy, and the many ways divination can help us navigate and plan our paths ahead.
I'm so happy to welcome back to the show Dr. Al Cummins, someone whom many of you will probably recognize from past episodes. Dr. Al is a well-respected historian of magic, a diviner, and a teacher and author whose works explore early modern cunning craft, geomancy, and the role of spirits in magical practice. In this conversation, we drill down a bit more into what it means to work with ancestral practitioners, spirits of magical dead who can act as allies or collaborators with us. And we also explore what it means to test spirits in practice, how our discernment develops with that over time, and how divination, including geomancy, fit into that as a living dialogue. It was a pleasure to connect with Dr. Al in person recently at the Sacred Space Between the Worlds conference, and as I mentioned in the episode, we will also both be presenting workshops at TempleFest this September here in New England. If you don't know about TempleFest, I recommend checking the link in the show notes to learn more. Just a quick note from me as well, pre-orders of my first book, which I'm so excited about, The Diviner's Path, which is coming out from Llewellyn, are open. The official release date is June 8th, and pre-orders really do make a huge difference for authors. So if you've been meaning or thinking about picking it up, now is a good time to order. I will also be offering a Q&A and free class at LlewelynCon in June, and also there will be an exclusive free workshop for those who pre-order my book. You can find all of the details for that on my website, and you can always chat with me on Instagram at Coffee and Divination. So let's dive in with Dr. Al.
So it is my pleasure to have back on the show someone who is now, I will call him a friend of the show. I'm sure many people will be happy to have him back on. Thank you, Dr. Al, for being here and for talking to us.
Thanks for having me back. It was lovely to bump into you at the conference we were at in, I would say, February, right? And yeah, great to be back and chatting again. I will ask for your forgiveness that I don't have coffee in front of me and that I have the taste buds of an English child. But I am drinking tea at least, so I'm going to be caffeinated at least. So we'll see what the long walks on short tangents are at the end of this.
I will just, this maybe I shouldn't admit to our listeners, but there are times when coffee and divination does not happen with coffee because it is too late in the day. And we're recording this in the evening. So no, I also cannot have coffee in front of me. That's all right. We will continue with the thought.
Absolutely.
So the conversation today is conceived of as continuing on with a thread that, speaking of that conference that we were both at, Sacred Space, you gave a couple of different presentations there, which were wonderful. And the one that I'm thinking of was on the nature of necromancy and magical practitioners having allies with the dead and with the ancestors that give meaningful and very useful practical advice. It is something that clearly, I mean, you have written numerous books on this topic and papers, and I'm sure even some things I don't even know about or haven't read yet. And I think that it is a fascinating discussion. Can you first talk to us about, just to introduce people if they are not familiar with this concept, what do we mean when we are talking about working with ancestors of practice or spirit allies in magical practice for us as modern day practitioners? What does that mean?
Sure. Yeah. As my last appearance on the show kind of highlights, I am very much interested in wandering around graveyards, making friends with dead folks, and doing a whole bunch of things that I've ended up calling folk necromancy. So this is indeed dear to my heart. We can talk about ancestors and like spirits involved in this kind of interplay between the worlds of the living and the dead, as well as those that help us engage with our practices in a variety of ways. We can talk about ancestral spirits, and it's probably worth starting by pointing out that that can include actual ancestors, whether by blood or by adoption. And after all, many initiations are a kind of adoption, right? You are being um, brought in to a, if only a fictive, anthropologically speaking, family kind of group or unit, right? But it can start with actual ancestors, and we can talk about the ways in which we can ask for basic support or receive more specific guidance from our familial dead, as well as sometimes untangling knots of familial tension or miscommunication as well. That can also be a really important part. But I think what we're really talking about is what sometimes gets called the mighty dead. That is lineage ancestors, those practitioners who came before us that have established or torn down, in some cases, traditions and practices and techniques that we draw on today. So these are sources of inspiration, but they can also become guiding spirits or what get called tutelary spirits. And I think it's worth bearing in mind that tutelary describes a relationship, not an essentialist category of spirit, right? They're not distinct from fairies or dead folks or angels. There is historical record of all of those being individuals, spirits of those natures or groups or classifications, if you want to call them that, entering into tutelary relationships with living practitioners of the time. And so I'm interested in where mighty dead, where again, dead diviners and magicians and witches who did, like, say, the divination we do, can be not just sources of, let's say, abstract inspiration, but also closing that parasocial gap into actual social, right? Trying to actually engage with them, trying to, ask their advice as well as follow in their footsteps to some degree. I'll add that the other big kind of place or relationship that tutelary relationships can develop from is with spirits of an oracle itself. So as a keen geomancer, I'd say like various planetary and even figural spirits can themselves be spirits that teach you about the oracle that they are part of. Um, yeah, yeah, I think that's at least a start.
That is plenty to begin with. I completely agree. It is, I want to, as there's a lot of questions that flow on from that immediately that spring to mind, but there is one thing that I want to sort of touch on first, which is that when we talk about the idea of ancestors of practice,
Mm.
and this is perhaps a little sideways from our conversation here, but I think that it's important, and it is getting a lot more discourse right now, but I'm curious your thoughts. With myself being somebody who does choose to sometimes use the word witch to describe myself, and there's plenty of other people who don't. Priestess, magician, whatever, tons of names. I think that it's interesting and important to also note that the use of words like witch, which do primarily have negative connotations, may not, to some people who are dead, have been positive at the time that they were living, even if they might practice things that we would put into that category in the modern day. Are there ways that you see sort of like our definitions in the modern day changing how you either are conversed with by people who are in that category, or that you feel like we need to be aware as living people that those others may see it differently than we do?
Yeah. Yeah. As you say, it's really important to understand that witch has and continues to mean different things to different people. And I can speak from more kind of personal experience in terms of a lot of my work as a contemporary cunning person, as a service magician, also involves the cultivation of relationships with dead cunning folk, with specifically 16th and 17th century, mostly English service magicians, dead, the cunning dead, and being and in that time period, specifically, which is a bit less, it is pejorative in the same sense that calling someone a thief or a murderer is pejorative, but it also describes a thing they did or do. And for the vast majority of early modern British folks, a witch is someone that does harm with magic. Um, the definition can absolutely change, and that's informed by a lot of different social and political factors, and has come to mean many different things to many different people. Source of great empowerment and reclaiming for a lot of people. But when working with dead cunning women, especially, some of whom were accused of witchcraft for doing exactly what their male counterparts did, without any criticism. It's a hot topic. It's a triggering word, we might say, for some of those dead. And so it's somewhat easier for me because I engage in a lot of practices that I'm sure many other people would call witchcraft. I don't consider myself a witch, and so that's less of a problem for me. But this is something that we might also deal with if we are attempting to talk to even living elders. I know plenty of my colleagues and friends who do actually have that grandma who refers to herself as a proper Catholic, but is in the back of the church doing her stuff that the priest doesn't need to know about. That's how my great grandmother would put it. Who also similarly would say, no, we're not Strago, we're not witch, we're not whatever the cultural specific term that gets translated to that in English is, and you shouldn't call yourself that. That's going to cause trouble. And there are so many different layers to that, right? Like you've got diasporic assimilationism versus like maintaining a culture. You've got the idea of we do good magic, we do good blessing, and that's still a word often connoting someone that at least has the capacity to do harm. And so, yeah, navigating that can be a little tricky. Just as navigating spirits of dead people who were and kind of remain very Christian can also be a factor for many folks. I liken it again to going to church with Big Nan, with my great grandmother, who was an ardent little old Irish Catholic lady, but also taught pranayama yoga for 40 odd 50 years in Wolverhampton, and did a lot of strange things that, as she said, you just don't tell the priest that. So I think there are ways in which we can frame what we do in ways that are more or less comprehensible to people from different generations. And that might be a good way of thinking about our lineage ancestors as people of a very different generation, without, giving them excuses to be toxic or offensive, to be cruel, right? And to understand the limits of their enculturation, while still acknowledging there are ways in which we can get things done by not lying or misrepresenting ourselves, but doing it in a way to seek more accord and harmony than discord and disagreement.
I couldn't agree more. I'm a big believer that, and I love that way of putting it, of just very different generations. It's just a slightly more like wider
Yeah.
swath of the generations than we're used to considering because of,
Mhm.
mortality and all that. Um, but that's a great way of thinking of it, which is also not about misrepresentation, but it's
Mm.
about better understanding, because
Yeah.
definitions of words change and cultural understandings of words change a lot. And it's hard enough when you're dealing with a generational gap of 20 years, let alone 200. So
Right.
that's something that I'm fascinated by. So I appreciate your thoughts on that. I will probably come up when we're talking about some other things as well. But I like to start from there so people are aware that we are talking about gaps. Because I think that's also a part of it, where we're talking about gaps of understanding because we're looking at disparate time periods and sometimes,
Mm.
very different, even countries, different, so cultural backgrounds that we are going to fall into misunderstandings that are very possible because we are still limited. And I think that's one of the other things where maybe we'll just jump to that. It's a little later in my question list, but when we're thinking about working with these types of spirits, how do you have any first thoughts on the limitation of knowledge that different types of these ancestral practitioners have, because I sometimes get a little concerned when people will put something on the dead where it's like, well, they know because they're dead. I'm like, well, do they? They're just dead.
Yes. 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 Yeah, that was good. That's my first thought on this, is that dying or yeah.
Or are they just, well, they're dead. So what do we do with that level of knowledge?
Yeah, being dead is not in itself a guarantee of enlightenment. Um, Pretty much every culture that I've encountered that has ancestors in some way distinguishes dead people from ancestors. Not that they're completely different, but that ancestors are usually those who have been through a process of some kind that we can call ancestralization. Sometimes that's stuff that the living have to do. Often that's also stuff that's conceived of that the dead are doing, that they are changing in accordance with a variety of things. Espiritistas will talk about like elevation of the dead. Other peoples will speak of the dead going away somewhere and then coming back, changed and hopefully a little more enlightened, let's say, a little wiser. But yeah, definitely just because a dead person told you a thing does not mean you have to pay it more or less mind than you would a living person just telling you that thing. Is this someone that you know has been studying this for a very long time and has a track record of knowing what they're talking about, or is it just some dude on a train? Who might also point you to something really useful, but might also be, trying to lick the walls or something.
Okay, so then let's just let's go with that. With the understanding that we have already now defined our terms, that simply we're not exactly sure what people who are dead might choose to have called themselves in life, or choose to understand the help that they're providing to the living now,
Hmm.
what they'd feel comfortable calling that. And also knowing that they might be some guy on a train, or they might be a very advanced practitioner in life and death. Um, how do you conceive of, if you were going, and you could go, please feel free to go historical or personal or whatever you'd like to take this question. What are some of the big picture frameworks of what it means to test spirits? Maybe we start with just a definition for people who may not be familiar with that term of what is testing spirits and what do we mean by that?
Sure, yeah. So historically, there are a lot of practices in European conjuration, especially, but we do see some of those in kind of more folk magical expressions as well. Of once you've called the spirit, how do you ensure it's, quote, the right spirit? Either in terms of like literal caller ID, as well as is this spirit the best or the most or a good spirit to work for this particular thing, towards this particular endeavor, if it's a particular or specific working or operation. Historically, spirit testing has often been tied to torturing spirits, but that's also because the wider history of especially what now gets called and got called at the time Solomonic conjuration is very much a vaunt and ask questions later, right? Is very much shake your insigilized sword at spirits and because of a Christianized lens on some of these far older practices, and also the specific coherence of these conjuration techniques from exorcism, both pre-Christian and definitely Christian forms. There is overall an antagonism to spirits that is kind of, I wouldn't say baked in because I don't think it's inherent, but often unexamined. And so, in the course of otherwise not necessarily trusting spirits, there's an awful lot of tests of spirits by backfooting them with, say, false claims of deceiving you or um, tricking them in various ways so that you have the upper hand, treating it as a conflict from which you must emerge dominant. And I don't think I know that's not the only way we can do things. But that is a big part of the record. Sadly, the excellent book, The Art of Magic, which is a grimoire that emerges or that is written in 1567, and we know that pretty specifically in the spring of that year because the two operators, the magician and the scryer, who put it together, Humphrey Gilbert and John Davies, in the 16th century, also kept a really great magical journal of their experiments. And they talk about, we did this thing, and then these spirits turned up and they told us to do this if we want to get good at magic. And then we did that thing and wrote it in the grimoire. So the magical record forms a kind of like behind the scenes or a director's commentary of the grimoire itself. And that has a lot of, when you summon a spirit, you should, their example is you should hide a ring and then ask the spirit where the ring is. And so this, I think, doesn't necessarily have to be antagonistic. They made it so because their advice is even if the spirit is right, tell the spirit that it's lying to you so that you backfoot it, so it feels like it has to make up for something. It's toxic behavior. It's utterly like
Lighting spirits is what
yeah,
you're.
that's exactly what it is. Yeah. There's also a bunch of other actual spirit torturing techniques, which are more about if the spirit doesn't do what you want. Um, Exposing its sigil to, or the classic is like exposing its written sigil to brimstone, to sulfur, but also putting it in materials that are antipathetic to its nature. So, yeah, also, putting an airy spirit in stinking earth, for instance, those kinds of things that are designed to be unpleasant to the spirit. But the basic idea of setting a spirit a kind of interview where you see if it can actually do the things that it either claims it can do or that you want it to do is not, I don't think it has to be inherently antagonistic or abusive. I think there are ways in which we can see how they respond to different ways of working as well, right? Which also can include how we adapt our working style to that spirit's strengths and or blind spots. And it very much depends on the nature of the spirit. Is your spirit, which also informs like how you work with them. So it's less can it do this thing or not, more how do we work together to ensure that this works? What is the relationship we're building? Sure, but that also has to come with a certain degree of trust that we're going to enter into attempting to build a relationship in a way that is conducive for both of us, right? As I'm fond of saying, ideally, necromancy is about mutual aid. And I'd extend that to other forms of like conjuration. As many people have pointed out before me, comes from the root to conjure, right? To swear together, right? To conspire. And that can be the pact, but that can also be like agreeing to help each other. And if I don't think this is a tangent, but I think you can find many spirits that aren't antagonistic to you either, but also might work in a very, very different way. Um, uh, I find myself thinking of falconry. How familiar you are with falconry? I learned a little while ago that the term "fed up," to be annoyed and to kind of be sulky, comes from falconry. You can't actually fully domesticate a falcon. The best you can do is bribe it with food. But it will do things, but it's doing them because it's smart enough to know that if it does it and comes back, it'll get its pound of flesh. The phrase comes from the fact that they would take that meat up into a high tree and eat it and then be fed up and not want to do anything else. I have definitely encountered spirits that work like this. Where they will not be domesticated. They might not even want to come into a home. We have to call them outside. And they will do a thing, effectively and even safely. But once they've been fed, if you feed them beforehand, if you make your offerings beforehand, they're going to take that and be like, why would I do it? I've got what I want. I was very upfront with you about this, like, and it's not necessarily even in a deceptive way. So there are things around like not spoiling our spirits, ensuring that we have a good understanding of when we scratch each other's backs, how we work together, right? Um, is the spirit more of a puppy where it's like just around all the time and super excited to do things, but might not be able to actually achieve those things just yet, you know? So understanding I guess the personality, the working style of the spirit you're working with can be a part of testing Not so much are you worthy, but or are you an enemy? But let's work out if you're right for this. It's the job interview, right? Are you right for this position?
I absolutely love that. By the way, I do love falconry, and one of the reasons I love Vermont is that there is falconry practiced in the state. I have not yet done it, but I live on a tract of land that it is possible. So yes, I completely agree. I think that that also ties in with the understanding of recognizing that different spirits, just like different people, honestly, have different priorities, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's more or less upfront. It's just that the assumption can be that other spirits, just like other people's priorities, would be the exact same as ours. Their
Right.
work conditions are going to be what we would do, but that's not the case. In particular, if we're dealing with, well, we're already dealing with different forms of sort of energies or life, if you want to conceive of it as that, or generational differences, then we have even more disparity that could arise in expectations and working conditions. So
Yeah.
that's really true. Um, I, with that being said, so let's say that you are seeking to better understand what the rules of this falconry are with a new type of practice, whether that is a form of divination or a new spirit list or a new spirit within that. I'm not sure how much detail you can get or just really how different this would be. So it's kind of a deliberately vague question. But are there broad strokes of how you conceive of trying to figure out whether you're dealing with a puppy or a falcon?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think this is usefully what we can call spirit discernment, and more specifically where we can actually apply the divinations we can already rely on, even if we're learning a new divination system. Divination to assess the spirit themselves, their personality, nature, sympathies, antipathies, but more so to consider the possibilities and requirements of a helpful working relationship. I think there's divination to assess the working you're considering with that spirit, like planning stage stuff. Who are you having on your heist team, right? There's divination as pre-flight check. Have I forgotten anything important, right? Or have conditions changed and I need to adjust for a thing in the in the micro interactions. There's also divination as debrief. How did the thing go? What was encountered? What was encountered unexpectedly? How was it managed? How was it potentially mismanaged? Or what could we learn from this, both good and bad? And again, these kinds of divinations and discernments can be, I think, can be computational and non-computational. We've talked about those terms or concepts for different kinds of divination before, right? So
Fresh, just so we're clear again. Yeah.
yeah, I only came across them a couple of years ago in I think Jim Baker's A Cunning Man's Handbook, which is a wonderful primer on early modern cunning craft, and he um, puts forward these terms for computational and non-computational divination. Non-computational are the kind of more mediumistic, non-rational ways of knowing, not necessarily irrational, but dream, vision, mediumship, psychism, all those kinds of things. Um, Also, things led more off quote intuition and things like that. Computational is stuff, in short, with rules, where we might still, where two different astrologers or geomancers might disagree about the interpretation of a chart, but we can agree that that is the chart. We can agree that that card fell. We can agree that that number was rolled on that dice. So computational has more rules and can be better for kind of quantitative stuff, and non-computational can be better for qualitative stuff. And ideally, in this kind of discernment we're practicing, in these kinds of divinations we're doing, these ways of knowing we're developing and exploring, whether knowledge at a distance or insight at a distance, we might say. Ideally, we're doing both, right? Dreams and mediumistic messages can be helpful to prompt us to assess more computationally, especially with a simplified uh, oracle that can provide yes, no, yes, but, no buts, some maybes, maybe, but can confirm. Right, so we get confirmed personal gnosis, right, rather than unconfirmed. Likewise, a chart can absolutely say, can encourage us to go dream on it. to go do some dream incubation about something, or to have a more mediumistic way of exploring the quantitative data that's available. So we can utilize a broad variety of intuitions, psychisms, and checking and confirming in various ways. But I think, again, the point is that that kind of discernment for me is usually less about, is this a good spirit or an evil spirit? So much as, is it the right hire? Is it the right acquaintance, or even friend for the job? Like you were saying, people are different. My rough punk friend is probably not the person I'm going to ask to look after my dog or water my plants, but might be exactly the pal who steps to defend me from a mugging or something like that. Um, treating your friends differently in accordance with how they are is as equity, right? Is not. Again, is not being two-faced necessarily. We are different people in different situations, and different, we have different kinds of friendships. So we can put it like that as well.
Absolutely. My Hellenic Greek lens goes to the technical versus intuitive styles of divination.
Yeah.
Also, completely, an artificial construct in the sense that even though philosophically, like some ancient people did conceive of it that way, it's never purely one or the other. It's the
Yeah.
same, where it might either lead to or be led from another form, but it also always kind of involves a bleed through of both of them. But they're useful as framing devices to know which is more useful in a certain circumstance.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Certain spirit or just a certain type of situation that we're in. So
Yeah.
that's absolutely, I completely agree with that. With that being said, when you are determining whether it is a time for the friend who's going to defend you from a mugging or not, you personally, so we can talk about historical examples, but do you as a geomancer like go to geomancy as a way that you will determine some of these different types of checks and balances, or do you say throw cards? Do you do other things? Like, what do you like to do in terms of like starting these processes out?
I'm mostly a geomancer these days. I try and keep my oar in with cartomancy, as a lot of my dear friends and colleagues are very, very gifted cartomancers. So I like to be able to speak playing card with them. But yeah, mostly I'm going to geomancy, whether that's mostly full charts, if it's something I'm serious about, a full shield chart, which, if folks aren't familiar, you can think of like a 15 card spread. The last three of those are kind of distillation of the other figures. It's your executive summary of the judgment of the chart, as well as, it's called a court, the last three places. So there's a judge and there's two witnesses informing why that's the judge. But then the other 12 places of that shield chart, which is called so because it's shield shaped. Sometimes we are not so arcane. Are assigned to the 12 houses of the heavens. Geomancy is the sister of astrology, and we steal a lot of her clothes. So we don't necessarily look in every one of those places in a reading either. So if it's a love reading, we're probably going to quesit we're going to query, we're going to look at the marking in the seventh place, because that can cover the other person, the partner, can also cover the relationship, can measure the problems in the relationship, as well as the potential solutions or strategies for dealing with those problems. And again, those are things that we need to determine before any sticks or dice are thrown, because we need to know what we're measuring. One of the biggest problems I see of people learning geomancy is, and really a lot of divination is, being loose in your question. And we can be very precise in how broad we are. We can firmly delineate a huge range of options or topics, but we need to delineate, because if we don't, it can be unclear if we're looking at the problem in that area of life or the solution. That's especially the case in, say, like the sixth place, the sixth house, Valetudo, which health can cover what's good for you to do to keep up with good health, but it can also measure what's wrong with you right now. What's the nature of the disease, the sickness, the malady, the dyscrasia, the bad mixture. And so we want to be very clear about what we're measuring. And I would argue we want to do that before we've cast anything. So yeah, I will usually do a full chart. There are times when I'm doing more just kind of confirming of more mediumistic messages, where I'll do short throws, where I won't do a whole 15 place chart, I'll throw a couple figures and see how they talk to each other and what they're suggesting. Again, that when people ask when do I do one and when do I do the other, I would say if you have the time and you want to take something seriously, do a full chart. But if you are, mid graveyard and you seem to be getting you seem to be getting on really well with this ghost, who was a doctor and a philanthropist in life and is like, yeah, take my dirt and we can do cool stuff together with it. I'm going to still check that that's okay, that I'm getting the right signal on that. And that's often a shorter throw. Casting one or two figures might sound like it's easier to do than a whole chart, but I will say that a whole chart can be a lot clearer about what the answer is, whereas two figures talking to each other, two of the 16 answer figures of geomancy, there are 256 combinations of those. Do you know all 256 combinations? If you do, then great. If you know enough about the 16 figures to know how they talk to each other. The other factor in geomancy is that we add figures to other figures to generate a third figure. It's a very dialectic process, because a geomantic figure is, if we're going to talk mathematically, is a 4-bit binary construction. They are like the I Ching, made of 4 rather than 6 lines, but they are single or double dotted, broken or unbroken. And that means that you have 16 possible answers, and you can add a figure to another figure. So you have your thesis, what's going on. When that pattern of energy of the cosmos playing out meets this other pattern of energy, spirits, influences, inertias, they will produce a third. Synthesis meets antithesis produces synthesis. And so we are literally adding measurements of what's going on to it encountering a different thing and what happens as a result of that. So short throws look easier, but it's the kind of easy that comes from practicing for a very long time, is my long-winded way of saying that. So I will do mostly geomancy, whether short or long throws.
Yes, there's a number of different questions that occur to me following on from that. Of course, geomancy, I'm sure many of the people listening are familiar with geomancy. We're not going to do a basics of geomancy right now.
Sure.
If you're curious about that, please listen to previous interviews with Dr. Al. Go to his many wonderful works on geomancy, etc., and other shows that he has been on. However, it is interesting to me that given the time period, and please correct me if you do not feel that this is correct, but that the time period of some of the spirits that I am assuming that you work with fall within a period when geomancy was quite popular, and now it is gaining once again, as it should, more popularity in the modern day, thanks to you and many others. Do you feel in any way, before we go to other more specific questions, do you feel that like historical connection point has something to do with why it works so well for you? Or is it just simply, well, that's the one that I am gifted in, do a lot of work in, and they use what we know best? I'm just curious, like what your thoughts would be on that, because it does seem interesting to me that it was so popular in those time periods, and it's what you're drawn to, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, maybe it is a little bit of a chicken and an egg. Do I do geomancy because I studied early modern history and practice a lot of magic from the early modern period, and that was one of its like heights of popularity, or am I just drawn to it because it makes sense to me, and that just so happened, and that encouraged me to get further into early modern magic? I'm not sure. It's certainly an advantage. It's certainly a benefit that I mean, beyond working literally with dead geomancers, right? Shout out to John Hayden. I also work with more service magicians and cunning folk and village wizards than I do old ceremonial magicians. There are some exceptions. I have a good working relationship. I think a good working relationship with like Saint Albertus Magnus, for instance, who is a more regarded scholarly magician, right? That's less debated now after a couple hundred years of various church apologists being like, just ignore him talking about magic. which he did a lot, and about his own practice very occasionally as well. What were we talking about? Working with these kinds of working class magicians, for want of a better term. And geomancy does have a long tradition, especially in like Persianate times and periods and places and peoples, of being incredibly learned as well. But it also has this reputation of being dirt astrology. And I like that, and it works for me. It stays grounded, every pun intended, while still being capable of being gnomic, but boom. And so for me, yes, it's a lot more tangible and practical than getting lost in the stars, for instance, too much, while still drawing on a lot of the same core mechanics. So I can hold my own, certainly amongst astrological magicians, or at least understand what they're on about most of the time. Uh, so I think it does definitely do benefit to be able to speak in a particularly grounded form of divination with the kinds of spirits, with the kinds of tutelary spirits I work with, who are mostly about how do you look after your clients? How do you be part of a community? Rather than simply how do I pierce the veil and, touch the face of God, which is a bit above my pay grade, honestly.
Yes, I always say I just work here. So
Yeah, yep. It's a great one.
just the worker. So, well, that's interesting because to me, it speaks of respectfulness in the
Mm,
sense that you may not have gone into this for this reason. So I'm not implying that you did, but it intentionally or not has a respectfulness layer to, well, if this was actually familiar to the spirit that I'm talking to, then perhaps it's just a little bit of an easier way to communicate.
yeah,
And either it is actually easier to them or seems more respectful somehow to both parties involved in the communication, which then speaks to like cultural fluency and actually taking serious to try to approach an understanding of the other side of the conversation you're having, as opposed to just assuming that they'll be fluent in whatever you choose to show up with,
right.
as limited as that might be.
Yeah.
Um, so, kind of speaking to that, you've already touched on the idea that divination, in the sense of showing up and asking questions and making sure that you are actually asking at the appropriate time in the appropriate ways, even if you feel like, oh, intuitively I've gotten the sense, you're still checking. You're still
hmm
checking your sources, really.
hmm
Are there other things about developing these relationships with whatever we want to consider like ancestral practitioners, whether that is blood ancestry or spiritual ancestry, that you feel like people get wrong, that you've seen people like fall into traps about? Either
Hmm.
maybe that's just assuming it's all hunky-dory and everyone has each other's best interest in heart, or the opposite, and assuming that they're going to come for you if you don't have everything
Yeah,
guarded.
yeah. That's a good question. I think, I mean, to state the obvious, like all relationships, building relationships with spirits is about quality time, I think. Um, Also potentially about learning their kind of platonic equivalent of love languages, right? Not just personality, although that's helpful to know if this is a fussy spirit or a spirit that doesn't mind if you forget to make its offerings, right? Are they stern or hilarious? Are they a falcon or a puppy? But also like what they appreciate and how you can work towards closer collaboration. Um, and I guess the other big one, and this is something I do see, um, not as a people get this wrong, but people have to have a car to learn to drive the car, is boundaries. Essentially, is um, what is it about what is within your sphere of influence and locus of control, right? What will you do if the spirit does so and so or doesn't do so and so, right? Rather than what will you threaten them with or what will you try and force them to do. So, yeah, you see folks that occasionally, you see folks who, as professional divine, I see folks who are kind of assuming that because the spirit has turned up that they must be important, right? The kind of riding the coattails thing. The bulking up your own ego with the someone else's accomplishments. Occasionally, you don't see that all that often. Those people tend to burn their bridges as they, go on their egomaniacal kind of endeavors. Bless them. Wishing you well over there. You also see folks who are, coming from or working through a bunch of anxious attachment stuff around like, have I annoyed the spirit? Have I annoyed them? Am I good enough? Am I worthy? Um, which again, as a diviner who is very interested, my not just a diviner, my actual PhD is in the uh, interplay of early modern occult philosophy and magical practice and the emotions, the magical approaches to the passions, the experience and expression of them. So I'm very interested in my clients' emotional states, and where the for want of a better term, the psychiatry, which is a 15th century French term, so it's not inappropriate to use in terms of in the same sentence as early modern conjuration, where the psychiatry and the divination can kind of be mutually helpful, where my duty of care begins and where it ends. Um, and how working through a relationship with a spirit, like working through a relationship with a living human embodied person, gives us opportunities and lenses to look at our own behavior and what we have and haven't addressed about our assumptions and cognitive distortions about ourselves or about how we are perceived. That's maybe a long-winded thing, but often the problems are various forms of projection, is what I would say. That more commonly than you have encountered a murder spirit, which does happen, but less often, thankfully.
Yes, absolutely. And especially when we're dealing with spirits that are oftentimes kind of connected to, they can get connected to large scale sort of ideas of the past and even were conceived of, if I'm not misspeaking. Um, One thing that for me, and I'll sort of piggyback this onto the idea of composition, since I'm a classical musician, the
Mhm.
idea of composition and ownership or authorship is a very interesting thing that is not the same in all time periods. And the idea of authorship or ownership over even like magical practice or who wrote a text is an interesting thing, I think, for modern people, because we think of like, well, there's a book and Dr. Al wrote it and it's fantastic. And we have a clear conception of what ownership and authorship means within our cultural context. But that was very different in other cultures now and other cultures in different time periods. And the same thing can be said of like, well, what spirit actually has sort of ownership of that? What spirit is actually associated with that? And do you feel like somehow when people are trying to work with these older spirits and how there's this bleeding of, well, I don't know, everything's associated with Solomon, are we really dealing with Solomon? Are we dealing with lots of different practitioners that associated with Solomon? They, I'm sure, did not all have the same ends in mind all the time. Like how do you think about that bleeding of authorship and the different ideas of what it means to sort of like own or be associated with concepts?
Yeah, right. How many books attributed to Hippocrates did he actually write, right? When it's just not standard for a very long time to sign a work, right? It comes from the school of Hippocrates and might have been his, best students or trusted lieutenants or what have you. Yeah, I think that's worth bearing in mind. I think literally the point about Solomon is really interesting because there is some fairly new research coming out to show that an awful lot of the texts we call Solomonic may have been cohered by at least one magician called Solomon, named after the king, but probably in more like the 9th, 10th century, maybe even earlier or later, and might be a series of them. And so it's not as simple as being, are they a mythic or a real person? Because mythic people can encourage real people to do things, and real people can become mythic, right? Reverse euhemerism. Or no, I guess that's just euhemerism. Reading myth as corrupted forms of actual history, right? So it's a huge topic in like grimoire patronage, for instance. Um, I tend to say within reason and with respect, how can the myth work for me, or how can I find a way to work with the myth that isn't at odds with it, but that helps me get where I'm trying to go? Less why is this so, and more what can I do with it? And so yeah, teaching a class recently on working with Albertus Magnus, who I encountered during a Magi pilgrimage. I didn't realize his bones were in the Kirk of Saint Andreas in Cologne. I knew he was a Cologne guy, but yeah, walking into his tomb and being like, "Oh, hello," that was my like introduction to him himself, and it was interesting to explore that in that class, to look at his actual works like De Mineralia, and on animals as well. Like he did do a lot of stuff on the natural magic of plants, stones, animals, etc. But he also had an awful lot of works attributed to him, right? The Egyptian Secrets of Albertus Magnus emerges in the 18th century. Even the Book of Secrets, there's one he probably did, and there's a bunch that he probably didn't do that are inspired by him, but they are within an Albertine school or style now. Um, I have a bunch of like pet theories about how and why this happens. Some of them can be understood by intellectual history and its study of reception and transmission and things. Some of it is, if we're going to get down to brass tacks, begun or inspired or exacerbated by market forces. It's great to be able to stamp the name of a famous wizard on something if you're trying to sell it. That shouldn't be denied. But just because we might have a concrete record of why that bookseller decided to frame things in that way, we can also ask where he got the idea from in the first place. I don't think this denies the agency of spirits necessarily. And some of those works, in my experience, not to speak for a saint, but some of those works aren't he does not approve of at all, and it's like, I never said that, and I don't like when people say I did. And some of it he's like, um I've encountered um something particularly weird can happen with dead necromancers where they they also cast a shade in death, where I guess if we're going to go chaotic with it, there's an egregore that can form of the idea of Solomon or Cyprian or so on, that isn't really a dead person anymore, but is a collection of expectations, um, which I think of as, if you build a space in the astral, God, I hate myself sometimes. The If there is an expectation somewhere, a set of accrued cultural expectations, some spirit will eventually move in to that empty house and be like, "Yeah, I'm Lucifer. Great. What are the offerings?" Right? Um, and that can be a source of like anxiety in terms of like, am I actually talking to the spirit that it says it is? Ultimately, again, I think we come back to practical, time tested stuff. Like okay, you may or may not be this spirit, but are you going to do the things that I expect this spirit to do? And at a certain point, you're wearing the hat and you're doing the thing, and we're getting the results we want, right? It's kind of none of my business what other names you've gone by, or your spiritual history of of changing, of becoming something different. And I think spirits do change and develop as well. That was a very long-winded and kind of rambling answer, but hopefully that's getting yeah. Yeah.
Unless that just means that I ramble as well. I'm not really.
Well, for co-rambling, then it's like no one's rambling. It's great. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
But I think that also kind of gets into the idea of like soul part. I am in.
Mm-hmm. Death might be prismatic, right? It does seem that different parts of us go off to do different things, in my experience.
It's not just one thing. It
Mm-hmm.
becomes many bits that coalesce together in different ways past
Yep.
material form,
Mm-hmm.
for
Yep.
lack of a more clear definition there, intentionally.
Yeah.
But in the end, like when for us mortals, for us incarnate beings, it's like what a man can do and what a man can't do, to use Jack
Mm-hmm.
Sparrow. But
Mm-hmm.
like, does it does it work? Does it function, or does it not? But
Yeah.
exactly precisely where one bleeds into another is not the point.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think from artistically, like I play on a violin that is from 1803, that is from a specific school of a maker from Germany, but the exact person who put the violin together can't be identified. But the school of that maker is known.
Yeah.
That can be identified. So I think of it conceptually as though it was probably not that particular maker's hand who actually put that together. It's the school of, that
Yeah.
person. And therefore, all those workers, like at this point, several hundred years later, that has bled together to a sort of egregore, though I'm not really sure that's the correct term, to create the school, the spirit of the being of that practical work that then comes down through it. So it's both on a practical level of an art piece, or it can be a magical form or an
Yeah.
egregore or something that then kind of coalesces together.
Yeah, and I think thinking about it in multitudes rather than singular. Again, this is a pushback on great man of history stuff, right? And also a bunch of people who were behind them doing their laundry and making their sandwiches so that they could talk about how ruggedly individual they were, right? Mm, uh, but exactly, like rather than seeing like one grand King Solomon might have a relationship with that spirit as well, but also seeing like the other people that have taken that mantle and been inspired by that precedent that we also have a lot in common with. This is one of the ways that I explore and engage with saint work that we might have talked about before around um, following like Irish family naming traditions of why we have the middle names or the first names we do, um, is has led me to a deeper relationship with Saint Joseph and Saint Michael and some others, but is also put me very much in touch with a bunch of Josephs and Michaels in my family line ancestors who also venerated. And so I love that conception of where we can find the sympathia of praying in the same direction with the spirits we work with. The prayer of the gnomes is a great example of this. All the levies, prayers of the elementals, because you're not praying to the gnomes, you are praying with them to the divinity they venerate, which an invisible king who never withholds the wages of his workforce and who hides the seed of the stars in the kingdom of gems, to me looks like a very kind of socialist Pluto, honestly. Um, so yes, that's part of a, yes, all underworld gods, but also it's going to gnome church when I make that prayer, when I work with earth elementals, not I'm commanding you or I'm more important than you, or even do me a favor, you're more important than me, but hey, we both consider these values important. We both work towards, enlarge our minds, enlarge our natures, have pity on those who suffer, expand our hearts, upraise our minds, and enlarge our natures. Like these values we hold dear as we are working, as we work ceaselessly, we seek and we hope, right? As diviners, as not just seekers of treasure, but as wardens of the earth's treasure. Like all that stuff is there. And so looking at how we can find the core and shared values with our spirits, and with the legions, for one of a less goetic term, of the spirits that were inspired, the dead and the never human alive, is a way of organizing and cohering not just a moment, but the momentum of our practice.
Beautifully said. Um, One of the things that I've encountered sometimes with people who are not familiar with these practices is a certain degree of fear around either not, I don't want to necessarily say negative outcomes, but negativity or a feeling of negativity because of particularly that maybe more combative or uh, well, I'll just use combative. That's not the word I'm really looking for. Relationality with these spirits as opposed to reciprocity. Are there ways that you think of helping people reframe this? Particularly, like I'm thinking of like an excellent book and other really great manuals that are out there that might be scary for some, because I know some people that have been genuinely kind of a little bit frightened by the ways in which the relationships are framed as either very combative or very dangerous.
Hmm.
Do you think that that's a help that's just like, yeah, no, you should be scared and you should take this that's I mean, like, and both, and you and I both take this seriously, so I'm not saying not to take it seriously, but how do you deal with that sort of balancing a healthy amount of fear as opposed to letting it be like, I need to close this book before it breaks glass around me and damns me, or
Right.
the spirits attack me, like
Right
what's
before, yeah, before the demons at the end of Patrick Swayze's Ghosts leak out of the book itself and drag me to hell. Yeah, yeah,
great
yeah, yeah.
direction.
There are a couple angles here that I think are useful. I think the kind of sociological, anthropological take on Europeans having a sense of the uncanny dead might be a factor in terms of the necromancy of these things. The idea that even if a ghost is not turning up to, well, the medieval notion is that ghosts scare us so that we mend our wicked ways and go to church. The early modern, after the Reformation, ghosts start to take much more of a interest in actual human affairs, interestingly. And even with a ghost that's being helpful, there is a sense that because of the church's various takes on um, Judgment Day and the infallibility of the Almighty, that if a ghost turns up, something has gone wrong, right? Someone has been mistreated. There's unfinished business. Ghosts don't just turn up when everything's peachy. And that ghosts do certainly turn up when things go wrong. Violent, sudden death, unburied dead, all those classic Greek kinds of ghosts, right? That's right there. You want ghosts, that's how you get like ghosts, that's how you get restless dead. But getting a perspective of there's also such a thing as the elevated or elevating dead, who are there as ancestors. And you do see traces of this in European traditions as well. Again, to stand my favorite, don't tell playing cards. Geomancy has a bunch of stuff about the influence of ancestors specifically, not just dead people, but like ancestors specifically, and that you can chart that and measure that using these early modern geomantic handbooks. So that's the dead stuff. And the dead, come with a melancholy as well, even when, or, that of the grave. And so that can be kind of freaky. In terms of, like you said, like when you take this stuff seriously, some Goetia is more like swimming with sharks than it is with discovering that supposedly than a supernatural romance novel, right? Than discovering that misunderstood demon was really just a goddess in disguise, right? Um, love sympathy for an underdog. Love, the monsters that looked after us when the hetero the establishment that's supposed to be normal is actually more oppressive. Like all of those here for it, the queerness of monstrosity, all of super here for that. Also, some of the grab bag of the last 2,000 years of European spirit work that those Goetic spiritualists are, includes a bunch of, as I've said elsewhere, does include a bunch of pagan murder spirits, not just goddesses and gods of pagan faiths that were demonized. That happens too, but there are also plenty of spirits of manslaughter, of bloodshed, who were that for everyone, and they were not given a bad rep. That is an accurate rep. And so, yeah, some of them I would not recommend people poke. And it's much more a case of how do I navigate this tiger's territory than how do I ride it. That's not a useful, sensible option. But in terms of people's fear that they're going to do something wrong, that again, that can often be us telling on ourselves, right? And as folks who teach and facilitate these things, it's also important that we understand a duty of care in helping people through the stuff that can be helped through. And again, being aware that our duty of care has limits and must have boundaries as well. What is it? Compassion without boundaries is eventually self-destructive, right? These are important things to bear in mind as well. I have my own peccadillos, and usually based off my own experiences. I've been relatively public about the importance of what I call charm reduction for working with with certain fae kinds of spirits. I have not had good experiences with the fae in England. Maybe I was in the wrong, and I'm not going to hold that against anyone, but I will not be told that they are all secretly wonderful or powerful in a benevolent way. Um, and so,
No, I don't feel that
yeah,
people say it really. Okay, well,
it still happens. Not as many. There's more of a now. There's more of an integration of that into, oh, they're very powerful and they might haunt you and mess up your life, but I'm different. I'm everyone else had hubris, but I'm just genuinely better than the gods, you know. Um, Funny, a set of spirits that are mostly known for making people, lose touch with reality in various
I'm
ways.
sure that's a complete coincidence.
Right, right.
Yes,
Who
yes,
could,
nothing
yeah,
but a coincidence
who
there.
could say? Who could say? I think no one should have to do anything that they are terrified of. Um, Ideally, there is some stuff we build up in our heads as anxious people that can might only be combated by actually a little bit of exposure therapy or a little bit of like it was not as bad when I came to it. So I'm not saying we should never be uncomfortable. That is where the good growth stuff happens, right? Sadly, outside of my blanketed comfort zone. How dare they? Um, but if your practice never like, yeah, I'll say it never scares you, never like brings up something that is unnerving in some way that because it brings you out of your comfort and familiarity, then I don't know if there's an awful lot of capacity for growth in that. Um, and I think thinking about a magical practice as a process and an ongoing way rather than an achievement to unlock and then sit on means that if it's unnerving, looking at why it's unnerving, is it genuinely, killing your house pets? Then we need to break out the exorcism gear sometimes. But is it just that you are reacting to a bunch of unexamined preconceptions? Then that's worth looking at too. And not everyone has to do a super dangerous practice where they juggle knives on the regular. That doesn't have to be everyone's practice. Um, we can find ourselves being drawn to stuff that we're naturally good at. I think it's also important that we look at our blind spots and we look at working on the things that we are that we find naturally trickier. Hopefully, the idea is to be a little bit more well-rounded going out than when we came in.
Oh, yes. I'm a fan of the buddy system for that reason that I
Hmm.
feel like sometimes just if you have some other people in your life, at this point, I'm talking about mortal people, like actual human beings that you trust, though there's ways that you can talk about a buddy system within, spirit contact as well. But I think that especially it's important because for that reason, then you want to see like, what is this actually doing to your life? Is it killing your house plants and you're not noticing it? And someone else might be able to point out to you that
Right.
you need to pay attention to that, or vice versa, that like, hey, some stuff may be uncomfortable, but it's actually really helping you. And you should maybe continue in that direction, even if it is uncomfortable, because it's really a force for growth, even when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Uh, but we all need a little help when it comes to navigating that, which is hence also where divination and trusting things like geomancy, where you have some expertise that you've built up, or you have people that you can trust to help
Yeah.
you with that. So that's
Yeah.
great.
As I said before, I don't know a diviner I trust and respect who doesn't go to other diviners sometimes. We are too close to the wood to see the trees sometimes. We're too emotionally invested in things sometimes. We shouldn't put that pressure on ourselves to be able to split ourselves in half and be able to be our own readers. Like it's good to go to other people. It's good to not necessarily seek external validation, but to ground in having more eyes on the situation, like you said, having an outside perspective on how does this seem to be affecting your life, for sure.
Yeah. So as we come more to a close, I know that you have a few projects that you are going to be launching into. I know you always have like 6 books that you're working on. We won't talk about those right now. We'll just have you come back on to
Thank you.
talk about them when they happen. But what do you have that people? I have one more question for you after that. But first, what is it that you should know about what's going on right now, and then we'll go to the last question. Aha.
Well, most immediately, as we're recording this at the end of April, I hope I'm not spoiling any
That's all good.
any things there. Until the 15th of May, I'm currently running a sale O the May in honor of that coming greening, which is offering 40% off all my class and course recordings that are available over on the talks page of my website. So huge savings can be had. Very excited to help people get access to course and classes for saving some pennies, especially, hashtag in this economy. So that's running at the moment until the 15th. So folks should fill their boots as they see fit. The other things I'm currently excited about working on is just continuing to expand the archives of my secret library of a Patreon that's mostly dedicated to the three prongs of geomancy, traditional British cunning craft, and folk necromancy, but a bunch of grimoire stuff and practical things, sharing ritual arts, experiments, current research, clips of upcoming books and projects, some ritual music, just a little bit. I would love to talk to you about that more.
What? I don't even know about this. That's terrible on me as a host.
So I'm very shy about it basically, but I've been using the Patreon to share bits and pieces of like ritual art and music I've been making, as well as big old previews of current research and stuff like that. It's also where I do early releases of the talisman batches that I make and offer discounts and free one-to-one sessions for different tiers and things like that. So that's continuing to grow, and I'm continually daily grateful for everyone who's already there supporting me getting to do more of this work. So yeah, sales and the Patreon, and continuing to fiddle away with books and other projects like that.
Very cool. So now we'll get to the last question, which is simply that I want to leave space for if there's anything that you feel that the way that I always put it is, or always, in the last few interviews at least, I've been putting it that I have noticed that sometimes there are just certain themes or things that I find I'm having to say to people a lot, or topics of conversation that have been coming up for me more, or that guests are coming up, and I wanted to leave space for, is there some advice that you wanted to give, or some topic that you're like, you know what, I just want to say a thing that I need to talk about, and I just need to say this thing to people who are listening. It doesn't even have to be, it doesn't have to be magic, divination, I don't care. You just feel like you need to say this thing.
Oh wow. So yeah, I mean, like I think I know what you mean in terms of like synchronous topics, right? Topics that seem to come up again and again. Yeah, I was reflecting on this with a mentee, with someone I'm mentoring, about they were kind of new, and were sort of asking about synchronicities themselves, and were like still in a kind of what does this mean phase, which is a phase we'll go through. And again, it was a good way to talk about something I think we hit on today, around asking why can be useful, but it can also be a endeavor that a lot of people, speaking of lineage dead, a lot of humans have been kicking the tires off for a fair old while, right? Again, stuff that's kind of above our pay grade, about like the nature of God and the cosmos and things like that. And to ask instead, what does this say about my momentum, as well as the individual moment of a thing? Less why is this happening, and more what options, what optionality, what agency does it provide for me? How do I move forward from this crossroads? Which is certainly how I have found dealing with the intensity of synchronicities that generally tend to pop up as I'm doing particularly intense magical work, right? Where is the synchronicity highway? Like, what is my momentum that's going on here? How am I accelerating or decelerating, or things to bear in mind as I'm doing this thing, rather than stopping every time there is a geomantic figure on a license plate or something like that. So I guess any particular topics that I found cropping up again and again. Um, yeah, I think.
General advice, like you should do this more.
Oh. The bespoke nature that divination allows us to be in our advice and our encouragement and our cautions. That general sometimes will work just fine, but you are a special, unique snowflake, like we all are. And so your conditions might be answered by thinking less of ourselves as uniquely tortured and broken and special in all of our pathologies, and in fact, could probably just use a sandwich and a good sleep, right? And the world might look a little bit better then. It's frustrating when like that's the case. Like there's definitely a part of me that wants to be tortured and complicated, right? So I guess sometimes the simplest advice is like Occam's razor kind of thing is really useful to bear in mind. We are also creatures with bodies as great and as galactic as our brains may be. And so looking after ourselves and looking after each other is really important, both magically and ethically. And sometimes simple advice is great, and sometimes something that's simple can still be very difficult. And sometimes something very complicated can also be quite easy. So yeah, tailoring our advice, learning who we want to work with and trust and develop, friendships with, and good, fruitful working relationships with, and not having to listen to every voice in every occult forum on the internet. How about that? A little bit of shade at the end, maybe.
Yeah. Oh no, that's not shame. That's
Speaking of discernment, right? Believe not every spirit, even and maybe especially living human embodied spirits. Yeah.
yeah. We living spirits oftentimes have a few problems
Mhm.
that we're here to work out. Look at
Mm.
that. No, that is really great. And we also sometimes just need a sandwich. We
Yeah.
need a sandwich or some sleep. And that is also very true advice that I try to endeavor to give myself some nights. So I agree. Thank you so much. And I'm going to put a little plug in for both you and I, which is that both Dr. Al and myself will be presenting at Temple Fest. And if you don't know
Hmm.
what Temple Fest is, you should just look it up. I'll put it in the show notes, and it's there. And he's going to do a class, and I'm going to do a class. You're doing several, so it's fantastic. And I believe the tickets are on sale for that here on the East Coast of the United States. You should come and have a great time with us and
It's a
lots.
grand old time. Yeah.
Really is a great time. I haven't been yet, but I've heard stories, and I'm excited to be there this year. That'll be in September. So that'll be in the show notes as well. So thank you so much for your
Thanks
time.
for having me. Yeah,
And I can't wait until we have another excuse to have another conversation. So
absolutely always a pleasure to sit down with you and gab. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Black moon above, stars overhead. Don't you dare